Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Welcome, folks, to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig. You know, there are people who live loudly and people who live thoughtfully. And then there are those who spend a lifetime helping others shape their message, only to discover later on in life that they too have a powerful voice of their own. Today's guest is one of those people. David Eisenstadt. Welcome, David.
Nice to be back with you, Avrum. Nice to be here.
David has spent decades at the center of Canadian public life, not on stage, but behind it. A highly respected Canadian public relations consultant, he began his career at the PR division of Goodis, Goldberg and Soren, led by advertising icon Jerry Goodis. He later co-founded the communications group tcgPR with his wife Rhoda, building one of Canada's leading firms in technology and real estate communications. And then, around 76 years old, David did something which was quite remarkable. He became an author. For his first book, Under the Radar, profiled 30 notable Canadian Jewish musicians. His second, Musicians Under the Radar, highlights 36 notable Canadian Jewish performers, 36, a number that carries resonance in Jewish thought, which is double chai, double life. And perhaps that is fitting. After a lifetime helping others tell their story, David has given these artists and perhaps himself a kind of double life through memory, music, and recognition. He's reinvented himself, and today we are going to talk about his newest book, a book which covers what we call chazanim, cantors, singers within a synagogue or a temple environment. And I also want to talk to him about his motivation behind becoming an author and what he does in life. So once again, welcome to David Eisenstadt, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Avrum, thank you. I need to make a wee bit of a correction before we really get going. My latest book is not about cantors. It's an idea that I have that's actually germinated from the first three books that I had written. This all started back in COVID times, 2021. The first book is 30, which in journalism, as you know, is the end number that reporters and whatever give to their editors. For me, the 30, while it being an end number, for me became the beginning of a hobby. Obviously, you mentioned the second book, which was 36, Double Chai. It was a natural, because I thought, well, let's go from 30, and I'll do 36, and they'll all be different. And then the third book is 42, and there is some connectivity to Christianity and to the Muslim beliefs with the number 42. You have to read the book to find out what that is, but you probably know. A number of people out of the clear blue at different presentations that I had been invited to give, whether it was Jewish Music Week in Toronto or the Jewish Book Fair in Calgary or at Habonim or Temple Sinai, various venues. Would you ever consider doing a book by genre? And so after the three books of 108 chapters on 108 different performers, I guess I came back to my workspace, and of the 108, I found there were 18 jazz musicians. And I thought, 18, what a wonderful number. So that became this book. And forgive me for the shameless plug. I don't know how clearly we can see it, but
yes,
there you go. And then someone said, do you have 18 others in that 108 collection? I said, well, I'm actually in the middle of writing my next book, which will be 48, but I'll go back and take a look. Anyway, middle of February, a few weeks ago, this book came onto the market, Rock
Congratulations.
Musicians.
Yes.
Now, you and I had been talking about cantors, and that could well be another book, but I haven't written that one yet. So, for clarification purposes, want to be clear.
Yes, I apologize for that, and perhaps there is a reason um, that I misunderstood or I wasn't accurate, and it's a good time to mention why that is. You know, today is Sunday as to when people watch this. Or listen. It could be any day, but as we recorded it Sunday, this is the Sunday after Israel and America have attacked Iran, um, and we in the Jewish community are all affected by this because we have family in Israel, we have friends in Israel, colleagues, and some of us might even be affiliated with the Iranian Jewish community. So it's a difficult time. Many of us have not slept, including myself, and because we are trying to do what we can in order to help this mission to make sure that Israel has peace, and that we're hoping that there will be peace and democracy in Iran. I just got off the phone right now with my Israel, who lives in Tel Aviv. She's a Breslev Chassid, which means she's very religious. And right now we're trying to get her to the DMV in Jerusalem. So, long and short of it, the task is a difficult one, and I apologize for this.
No need for that. I'm not sure if your sound is as tight and bright as it could be. You may be too far from the mic. Forgive me for that, but you were really, really clear. And then you just had a terrific message, and some of it was not as it'll in the editing process. Maybe we'll do a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. Are we okay now?
Yes.
We're okay now. So, David, I am always very, very curious about humankind, about what people do and when and why, and I am really, really taken by the fact that people, even in their 70s or in their 80s, will often begin something new in their life, which they have not done before. And the reason I am is because it reflects real growth, real character, and personality. When I used to work in the nonprofit sector, I worked with this fellow named Milt Harris, who was well known in the steel industry.
Mhm.
And Milt, somewhere around 75 years old, he started to learn the harpsichord. And he invited me over to his house. He said, "Do you want to hear me play?" I said, "Absolutely." And I went to his home and I listened to him play, and he was really magnificent. So, what brought you to this point in your life where you decided to put pen to paper and become an author?
Well, a cousin and a mutual friend. Cousins can be friends, sometimes not.
Yes.
Bernie Farber, back around the COVID timeframe, reached out to me one day and said, the Canadian Jewish News has tanked for the second time. I've told this story on a number of occasions because this is truly the genesis of it. And he said, and a few of us want to find a way to keep community news flowing. We'd like you to be one of our writers. And he said, but let me tell you right off the bat, we're not going to solicit any advertising, nor are we going to pay anyone, but we'd like you to write for us. When family asks, you don't say no, but you buy a little bit of time. I said, yeah, Bernie, let me think about it. And anyway, a few days later, after I had actually done what I, in tongue-in-cheek, refer to as empirical research, I came back to him and said, I have an idea. You don't need another person to comment on the Holocaust, on anti-Semitism, on Tikkun Olam. There are lots of people and much better qualified than I am. But one of the things that I thought CJN didn't do, and maybe it was just a spatial issue because a tabloid newspaper only has so much space, they didn't do enough arts and culture. And I have an idea. And it partly is tied to my dad's youngest brother, who was a professional musician. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he was a contemporary of Mo Kaufman, and so many people know who Mo Kaufman is, but they not as many for sure, certainly on an international stage, would know of Mo Eisenstadt. So I have an idea that I would like to write, and I can knock out a column for you once a week on a notable Jewish Canadian musician.
Yeah, exciting.
And that I think would help the arts and culture. And again, it's all about zachor. It's all about remembrance. And so many people have out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
Sidebar: our youngest son is a tech guy, an AI guy, a graphic designer. He's designed all my covers, and he came up with the name Under the Radar. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Doing my empirical research, I asked a number of if they could name 2, 3, 4 Canadian Jewish musicians. And almost to a person, I'd get Leonard Cohen, I'd get Geddy Lee, the bass guitarist from Rush, and I would get Drake because the mama is Jewish.
Right.
And then nothing. And I'm going, oh my God. So I came back to Bernie after having this deep research and said, I will do this. And I want complete control over whom I choose. However, I would be open to any suggestions, but it will be my mind's eye that determines if they are in fact above the radar or under the radar. But I said, based on my Leonard Cohen, Geddy Lee, Drake, most are under the radar, even if they think they're superstars. So that's really how it began. Canadian Jewish News came back in its new format. They weren't interested in these columns. Not at all. Not at all. And unbelievably surprising to me, but I don't hold a grudge. Alan Simons, you know Alan, said he was starting up a newsletter, and he said, I've seen what you've written, and I would like to have an arts and culture component to it. So anyway, by that point, there were maybe 15 to 20 columns that had been written between the two publications. And Alan said, David, this is a book. This is a book. So I said, okay. And what evolved was this book, which I refer to as Volume 1. Yeah. And it's simply called Under the Radar. And it's 30 notable Canadian Jewish musicians. And Alan became the publisher. To some books available online. But by this point, I had received a number of nominations, and I had set criteria. Canadian, not necessarily born in Canada. Jewish, absolutely. Don't give me, and we just lost Neil Sedaka, but he wouldn't qualify. Wrong country. All genders, all genres, individuals and groups, and not all from Toronto and Montreal, even though our immigration has historically been to those two major markets, but there are Jews in other parts of Canada. And I certainly wanted to be able to represent, if I found a musician in Come By Chance, Newfoundland or Brandon, Manitoba, they would
go for it.
Well, they certainly would check off the geographic box, if nothing else. Anyway, all of that being said, that's the Genesis through the Exodus. And Alan said to me, he said, David, you can now call yourself an author, to go back to your point, Avrum, because he says, if you've written one book, you can call yourself an author.
Yeah. His point is well taken. I've started up a writers club, and I have 6 or 7 members, 3 from Israel, 4 from the here in Canada, the United States. And most of them are published. Some have 5 or 6 novels already under their belt. And there's something very unique about authors, I must tell you. There's, in my mind, because I want to be an author one day, I'm working on a book myself. There's something majestic about it. There's something royal about it. You put one word after another word after another word, and that in itself is power. Margaret Atwood said that. So I want to wish you kol hakavod, as they say in Hebrew, well done. You should be very proud of yourself, because not only do you have one book, you have 5 books, and that's a real accomplishment. But my question for you, David, is when you chose your topic, Jewish musicians. What was the underpinnings of why you were so attracted or so seduced by that area of life of Canada? Is there something local, or is there something indigenous to Judaism, whereby music is very, very important? A singer-songwriter, some of which whom we'll speak about, are they actually Jewish songwriters, singer-songwriters, musicians, or is that happenstance?
Well, again, one of my top of mind questions to everyone that I can speak to, and many of the performers have passed on. So oftentimes I'll find myself speaking to a close friend, a musical colleague, a family member, and Judaism in so many cases, Avrum, is the thread that runs through the 108 that I've written. But there are some where Judaism, no input at all. Mom and dad may have listened to Mickey Katz, or they may have gone to see Fiddler in the Roof. There may have been something, but not necessarily that inspirational. And yet, there are, again, I mentioned the criteria when it comes to cantors and composers they're all opera singers, by the way, you know that.
Yes.
Some of the most wonderful, inspirational Jewish music has come from the liturgy, and whether it was from the creativity of a Ben Steinberg, or to the mellifluous voice of Charles Osborne, who's recently become the composer in residence at Temple Sinai, or our very good friend Aaron Ben Susan, the wonderful Sephardic cantor who's recently become a rabbi. Talk about a career change at a particular stage in life. But again, with some, Judaism is so core to this, others not so much. And it's kind of ironic. I mentioned Ben Steinberg, and I am working on a sixth book, which will be number 48. Again, I'm doing the 666, and one of the artists that I have actually interviewed, and the chapter is already there, but I've only got 41 of the 48 written, so we're a few months away.
Very good.
Is Ben Steinberg's son David, who is a punk rocker in his teens and early 20s. So here you've got this icon of Reform Jewish music, and his offspring decided to go the punk rock route. Today he's and has been for a number of years. He's an entertainment lawyer at Denton's in Toronto, and very well respected and very connected in the music industry. But again, he was listening to his dad's compositions, but it took him on a different path.
David, to write about Drake, or to write about Geddy Lee, Leonard Cohen, there's so much written about the three of them, videoed films. So they don't, I would say they don't really need it. I mean, I'm sure they're complimented.
Well, and they're not in the books. They're above the radar.
Right.
Again,
They're not,
yeah.
But to write about individuals across Canada, Jewish musicians, singers, songwriters, and to give them, sort of a platform, they must be so grateful for what you're doing, are they not?
Well, one of the perks of this experience, and I confess it wasn't an objective, but I am quite touched by the comments, by the emails, by the text messages from family members who've said, the Canadian Encyclopedia had 2 paragraphs on my father's career.
Right.
You've basically given me 850 to 900 words in a chapter in a book with musicians from across the spectrum, not just classical, not just rock, not just folk music, not just cantorial.
Yeah.
You're there, and and that's been quite a gratifying. I use the word perk because it was like, gee, again, I'm learning all the time. I'm learning that there's so many. I mean, I can candidly keep doing this for quite a while. And as I say, I have a sixth book is in progress.
Yeah.
And again, not a week goes by that I don't hear from someone who will say, I mean, here's a good example. In the first book, Under the Radar, 30 Notable Canadian Jewish Musicians, I did a piece on a most wonderful harpist by the name of Erica Goodman. When I was doing research, I discovered she was, according to music industry sources, she was ranked, and this goes back maybe 4 or 5 years, again, when it was the first book, number 50 harpist in the world.
Oh,
and I thought, my goodness, I wonder if there are any other Canadians. I wonder the other 49
yes.
can't be that much better than she is. She is brilliant. Anyway, I didn't bother doing any more digging into harpists because I had my harpist, female, a composer, playing an instrument that is not necessarily mainstream, well-respected recording artist, and on and on. So first book comes out, I connect with Erica. We have a cup of coffee, we have a bagel, we schmooze, I sign the book. She's delighted, I'm delighted. We take a picture, a selfie, because it would help her promote. It helps me promote. It keeps this going, which is also one of the reasons I get lots of nominations. But she says, David, if you do another book, you must do my father. You must. And I thought, well, tell me about your father. And he was very key violinist with the CBC orchestras, with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And sure enough, when it came time to take a look at, the next roster, there's Erica and her dad. So there are cross-generational experiences that I'm experiencing that are terrific. Let me tell you another one. Again, in that first book, back to Bernie Farber, I said to Bernie, my Uncle Mo was a classical music composer. Of Mo Kaufman. To my television was starting to evolve, the late 50s, middle 50s, commercials, jingles. There's a ton of money to be made. And my uncle worked with him a bit, and they wrote some stuff together. But my uncle was very much a classical music guy. He also
I like that.
was the longest tenured saxophonist and clarinetist at the O'Keefe Center Orchestra, 26 years. But he gigged around. He played in the Royal Canadian, the Canadian Army Band during World War II. Wonderful career. But I said to Bernie, you know what? The first two musicians I'm going to write about will be Mo Kaufman and Mo Eisenstadt. And if somebody looks at that as nepotism,
so be it. Yeah.
Tough nuts. So be it. So I do the Mo Kaufman piece. Anyway, it's terrific. And in that same issue, I do Mo Eisenstadt. Okay, because when I'd come from Calgary to go to journalism school in Ottawa, I spent a week with my uncle Mo Eisenstadt, and I lived the life of a musician. It was wonderful. We went, I got seats at the O'Keefe Center again. We went, went to eat and drink where all the musicians went, whether it was, people remember Basil's Restaurant, Mars Restaurant, the Bagel, and on and on and on and on. It was a wonderful life. I went to see where the guy who made his music reeds for his clarinet and saxophones. Anyway, we had this wonderful time. So I do this piece in Mo Kaufman. I wind up going to New York University. Noam Lemish heads the music department there, and he's a wonderful, wonderful pianist and composer, Israeli-born. And I'm there there's an event for the playing tribute music to Mo Kaufman, and the group is called the Mo Kaufman Tribute Band, fronted by Mo Kaufman's grandson Jake. And in the group, longtime pianist, 21 years with Mo Kaufman, Bernie Sinensky. I go up and I speak to them both. I wind up doing a piece on Bernie Sinensky for book 2, 36 notable Canadian Jewish musicians. I go and I have a cup of coffee with Bernie. The book's published. I'm signing it. I'm in his studio. He's about to do a recording. He says, David, you got to do a story on Mo's grandson, Jake. He's a terrific saxophonist and a wonderful guy. So I wind up doing in book 3, which is 30, 36, 42, I do Jake Kaufman. I get together with Jake after the book is published. Again, I do a lot of coffee dates.
Yeah, we had coffee. The two of us.
And he says to me, David, I am just blown away. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I am honored. I was blushing a bit. I'm honored to be in your 3rd book, along with my 2 grandfathers in your 1st book.
Yeah.
I looked at him quizzically. 2 grandfathers? Your grandpa Mo, we called him Grandpa. Grandpa Mo is in the 1st book, but you're telling me your other grandfather is in my 1st book? Like, you can never do enough research. I said, who is he? He said, my mom's dad was Victor Feldbrüll, Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, classical music composer, conductor. Again, those were all the boxes that I checked when I discovered I'm going to do a chapter on Victor Feldbrüll, not knowing there was any connection to Mo Kaufman.
Yeah, isn't that something?
And so back to my comment about the perks, the joy, the Freilich feeling, the satisfaction of keeping some family legacies alive. Who knew?
I personally feel that's, as we call it in Hebrew, a mitzvah. I think the idea of remembering, as you said before, Zachor, which is very local to the Jewish people and our teachings, is a beautiful concept. And my parents taught my sisters and I that you should always highlight somebody if you can. Always give somebody a profile. And the fascinating thing about your life is that that's what you've done all your life as a marketing person. So you're conscious that there's somebody outside of you who has something to be discussed about. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. David, I want to ask you another question. Which instruments have you covered?
I've pretty well covered them all. In fact, in the book that I'm working on now, one of the artists is a composer of flamenco music, Montreal-born, with a Hispanic background. And what a wonderful discovery. There's another Montrealer who, when he was 12 years old, I'm not going to give you the names, it's coming in the next volume, but in love with a pedal steel guitar. The guitar that lays flat, and you see it in country and Western bands. And he wound up doing his whole career out of Nashville. And again, I wasn't looking for a pedal steel guitarist. But again, sometimes the instrument would be, again, with all of these boxes, genres, genders. A number of years ago, when I was involved with Temple Sinai's Brotherhood, we did an event with as a fundraiser to send, believe it or not, Temple Sinai kids to Israel. And we did an event, and the highlight was a wonderful cellist by the name of Ofra Harnoy. Ofra Harnoy. Yes. Unbelievable. Yeah. Ofra Harnoy is in one of my books. How come? If I was so taken with her way back then? Well, the reality is, at a point in her career, her mother took sick, and she made a decision to back away from her career and look after her mom. She was also having some family, personal issues as well. So things kind of were rocky. Anyway, fast forward, and I'm going to get to the rock in a minute. She reinvented herself after her mother passed away, and she's re-recording, and she's doing all kinds of stuff. She fell in love with her childhood sweetheart,
Right.
who happens not to be Jewish. That doesn't matter. They live in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Oh,
So-
they're new. I thought she
They're
was at
Newfoundland. So
Yeah.
here we are, like answering the question: whatever happened to Ofra Harnoy?
Yeah.
Well, my again, I'm writing musical history, not musical critique, and they're not softball pieces. They're not puffy. It's facts. This is who her dad's name was Chaim, mother's name was Miriam, mother's maiden name was such and such. She was born on such and such a date. She started playing the cello when she was, 9 years old, and talk about her career and the challenges. And the Judaism Connect is always there, more or less, depending on the artist. But anyway, that's again, back to checking boxes. So there I have an example of a musician who, while Toronto based, checked the box of, I've got somebody in Atlantic Canada. I've got somebody in Montreal. I'm talking to someone for the new book who's was born in Saskatchewan. There is not one of the 108. I do not have a Saskatchewan musician in the book. Few and far between. But they're books to be written.
Do you have anybody
chapters
you've read about who plays the oboe?
Yes, yes. There are two brothers out of Peterborough. Here's another geographic box checker. Lawrence Cherney is an oboist. He's here in Toronto. He has a business that does a lot of improvisational musical theater. His brother Brian is a composer and teacher at McGill University. Mm-hmm. How did I get to the Cherneys? Well, this is sort of another side of getting these nominations weekly, sometimes daily. Very good friends of ours, Frank and Marilyn Kislick. Marilyn is from Peterborough, and we do Shabbat dinner with them essentially every Shabbat. They come to our place, we go to their place. We've been doing this for years, longtime friends. Anyway, Marilyn's hawking me in a nice way, and she says, David, I know you're looking for nominations. You got to do the Cherneys. You got to do the Cherneys. Who knew? So I did a deep dive, and I discover Lawrence, the oboist, and then I discover brother Brian, the composer, and next thing you know, I have two chapters. That's two chapters from one Shabbat dinner. It was, mind you, she kept on a very frequent basis. She was lobbying very hard for them. She says, I grew up with these guys, and they were iconic, in terms of their commitment to music as kids.
I fell in love with blues many years ago, probably in 1978 when I was in Israel. Mm-hmm. Through my dear friend David Middleman Nefesh, and he introduced me to it. We watched The Last Waltz together, which is a magnificent movie about the band's very last concert. And I'm wondering, do you have any Jewish musicians, singer-songwriters, who play the harmonica?
That's a tougher
blues.
One. Let me talk about blues. I'm going to reference two. Number one is Danny Marks, a good friend. Danny was one of the co-founders of a group called Edward Bear. You may remember You, Me, and Mexico, and a bunch of other tunes. But he gave me a terrific, and as a writer and as a broadcaster, you would know when you get that sound bite, like, that's the lead, LED, of your story, whatever. Danny said to me, David, at 19, I was a rock star. At 21, I was a has-been. Because like so many groups, there's Bregas, there's different perspectives, there's different initiatives, there's different elements of creativity, things that were together become different, and the gap widens, and before you know it, group goes. Anyway, Danny ultimately reinvented himself, has a terrific voice as a broadcaster, and you can hear him. He is Mr. Blues on Jazz FM 91 every Saturday night. And he's a rocker still, because he gigs around Toronto and other places. He's often at these clubs and stuff. Excuse me.
They call him human jukebox, by the way.
Well, they do, and he's just terrific. In fact, I do presentations to different organizations, some Jewish, some not, and I always include a minute or so. I can't do 108, so I usually do about 15 to 18. And Danny's almost in every one. I don't want to take him out of a presentation while I would have done to at Habanim, or I might have done to Holy Blossom, or I might have done to Beth Emeth, or Jewish Music Week. Danny's always there, and he's got a tune that he recorded a couple of years ago called "The Man on the Radio," and it just personifies Danny. And again, he's Mr. Blues, and again, it's back to what category? Where does he fit? Well, I don't have a book on blues musicians, but on February 15th, the rock book came out, rock musicians, and Danny's there. Now, the compilation in both the jazz and the rock books are both 18, and it's totally coincidental, but Hashem must be looking down and saying, you're not going to write any more than 18 book. The reality is the chapters I haven't changed an iota, because the books in total only go back 4.5 years. So it's not like it's old stuff. And I thought, should I refresh? Should I add another 2 paragraphs? I thought, you know what? No. If somebody wants to buy the book because they like rock musicians, this is perfect. But if somebody would have read the same chapter that Danny was in that first group of 108, so be it. It's not a big deal.
I find it fascinating how you can successfully juxtapose so many different genres, as you mentioned, classical with blues and rock and roll and jazz and so on. We would be remiss if we didn't include in that group klezmer.
Well, exactly. And the very first klezmer musician I wrote about was Brian Katz. Mm-hmm. Brian is an unbelievably multi-instrumental guy. I mean, he's just terrific. David Bookbinder, who now spends most of his working time in Nashville. He's in, when people say, gee, which book is so-and-so in? I really have to stop and think, because there's this melange of musicians. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say, well, he's in my second volume or he's in book 3. It's like, trust me if I tell you he or she or it is there. There you go. In the first book, Aviva Chernik, Ladino, Hebrew, Yiddish. She's now composer in residence at Beth Tzedek Synagogue in Toronto, but still gigging around. And again, back to different genders, back to different genres, back to different styles, format. Again, and one of the boxes checked on Aviva was that she's from London, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Terrific. Again, so there's that mix of criteria that lead me to making the decision, and it's in my mind's eyes that he, she, whomever is indeed, and under the radar is not meant to be a slight. I've had a couple of musicians actually not want to be interviewed, and it's blown me away. We all have egos, and the reality is you can't be above the radar all your life. Well, maybe you can. Maybe Neil Sedaka was not Jewish, but not Canadian. But by and large, most of us, we go through the hills and valleys of life, and careers and opportunities and woulda, shoulda, coulda situations. But I've had a couple, maybe 3 or 4, who've actually refused and almost saying, "I'm not under the radar."
Right. Right.
And this was never meant to put anyone down. It was always meant to pull someone up. And not in a, I wasn't doing it because they needed it. But again, and that's why those 3 musicians who, I'm telling you, if I went after our interview today, if I went out on the street and bumped into a neighbor or a friend and asked the question, "Can you name 3 to 4 Canadian notable new Jewish musicians?" I'd get Drake, and the order would be different. Drake, Cohen, and Geddy Lee, and then nothing. Well, what about Danny Marks? What about Charles Osborne?
And the list goes on and on.
Yeah. What about Benny Meisner? What about Esther Gann Firestone? I mean,
Let's go there in a moment. Before we do, I'm extremely curious. I've been in communications myself most of my life, be it through my radio show on Talk 640 and CFRB with my dear friend Marty Gallen, who's since passed away about a year and a half ago. And I am fascinated with interviewing. And the reason I am is because I get to live vicariously through you, my guests. As an example, when I walk away from this interview today, I will be so excited that, firstly, that I've learned so much through you and from you about Canadian Jewish musicians, about writing, about growing at any stage of your life. But I'm curious, is there a vicarious component to all of this, to all of what you've written about? Are you, in your mind, are you a classic pianist or what?
Well, I do have an admission. Our older son, Harris Eisenstadt, is a percussionist. He's an educator, travels all over the world. He's a jazz improviser, does a lot of Afro-Cuban stuff. And he has finally he's allowed me to write about him in my next book. He's much more modest than I. And he once did an interview with the New York Times. It really was when the New York Times was a bigger paper back in the days when papers were bigger, back in the days when there was really an arts section. And he was doing, he'd released a couple of CD albums, and a reporter at the New York Times decided to do an interview with him. And at one point the question was asked, "How did you get into this?" And he said, "Well, my dad, when I was a kid, I would go down to our rec room, and he would be pounding away with a headset on a set of drums, and I would just sit there and watch."
Oh.
And he's the best amateur rock drummer I know. He was being more generous than that, but the vicariousness. I mean, our daughter-in-law's a classical and jazz bassoonist. Our grandson plays tuba and trombone. He's at a school in New York, in Brooklyn, called Edward R. Murrow, which journalistically is appropriate. 4,000 kids, 1,000 are in the arts. Can you imagine going to a school with 4,000 kids? He's in high school, grade 11. And he also plays in the New York City high school marching band. He plays sousaphone. So I get to live vicariously through those guys. And every once in a while I go downstairs and I will put on the headphone, and I'll pull out Danny Marks, and I'll pull out the Guess Who, and I'll pull out the Beatles, and I'll pull out Rod Stewart, and I'll pull out Mark Jordan, and bang away. But I was never very good. I never learned to read music, which was an alternative I could have made at this juncture in my life. I decided not to do it and just enjoy listening to others.
David, I grew up in a rabbinical home.
Yes.
My father was a wonderful orator. He was a wonderful leader. And, he also had a beautiful voice. And very often, because we were from a small city, Kitchener, and things would change rapidly where the cantor would leave, so there was
Yeah.
a void. And my
Sure.
father would, what we say in Hebrew, daven for the Almud. He would
Davening.
stand up and
Yeah.
pray aloud in front of the congregation. And he had a magnificent voice. And I remember listening to albums of Joshua Rosenblatt as an example, the great cantors
Oh,
from many, many years ago.
yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful voices. So I've always been enamored by them. And when I met Aaron Ben Shushan, who actually lives here in my building, and I've actually prayed with him in the synagogue across the street, and I would listen to him sing and how he fused together Ashkenazi music with Sephardic music and other genres so beautifully and so adeptly. I was just so incredibly taken by who he is and what he does and his instrument, his voice.
Yeah.
What brought you to start to research the cantors, the chazans as we call them in Hebrew, and soon to write about them?
Well, the in the very first book, and the chapters 30, 36, 42, 18, everything is alphabetic. So the very first chapter in my very first book, I chose a chazan who was the first chazan at the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Montreal, Solomon Amzalag. But he had a stage name. He came from Morocco. His name was Sammy, S-A-M, just one M, Y, El Maghribi. He was the Frank Sinatra of Morocco. He did. He was your Las
Crooner.
Vegas black tie crooner, and came to Canada and changed his career. You talk about career changes. He was a natural. And again, how did I learn of him? I learned of him because I know Daniel Ben Lolo, who is today the cantor at the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. And I have written a chapter about Danny, which will be in, hopefully, this next book. He said to me, it's about time, but so there are two examples of chazanim who have Sephardic roots, and of course Danny does a wonderful program with the Montreal Shira Choir. He's established his choir of adults who are challenged, but he's made this group of individuals' voices come together in such a melodious and wonderful and heartfelt way that there is a mensch for sure. Anyway, again, so back to Amzalag, the connect Ben Lolo to Amzalag recommendation. I somehow never kind of got to Benny Meisner in time before he passed fairly recently. But I wound up connecting ultimately with his son, and Benny will be in also. The chapter's written. It's in the next book. But again, there are other cantors that are spread throughout. Judy, I did a chapter on Judy and David, Judy Adelman Gershon and her husband David. Well, Judy for 14 years, it was a wonderful kids. They were a duo, and they did children's music. But for the past 14 years, she was the cantor at Temple Emmanuel and has become the senior cantor now at Temple Sinai in Toronto. Again, for the new book, Esther Gann Firestone, first female cantor in Canada. Who knew? Well, I guess the Habonim congregation knew, and maybe others. I'm sure others knew, but part of my objective was, again, checks off different boxes. Female, cantor, first, Toronto, justifiably important to make sure she's remembered.
And she was regularly on CBC.
And she was regularly on CBC, of course. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, back to CBC. Malka and Yoso did a piece on a chapter in Malka and Yoso.
Oh,
Well,
did you? Yeah.
Malka's Israeli. Everybody thought Yoso was her husband and Israeli. No, he's
That's
from
right.
Croatia, and he wound up opening a Mediterranean restaurant.
One
After
of the
he
greatest
quit.
restaurants in Toronto. Yes.
It's a terrific restaurant in Toronto, and Yoso's son Leo
Yes.
runs it today, and Leo's son, I forget the name, is the
yeah.
chef. Is the chef. But again, it's there's family, there's connectivity, there's again, Malka, wonderful singer, but again, folk music, that's another category. That's another category. Ben Mink, a lot of people think Ben Mink just did folk music. Well, or he did klezmer music. He actually made K.D. Lang's career. He has written more stuff with K.D. Lang. Constant Craving is the one that always comes top of mind. But Ben Mink, this kid from, I think, Bathurst Manor, ultimately, winds up, he got an Order of Canada about a year ago, and for his musical contribution. Another guy, Jerry Gray and the Travelers. This land is your land. The story about Jerry Gray.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Goodis, Goldberg Soren. I went to work for Jerry Goodis actually after I spent some time in the corporate communications world at IBM Canada. And Jerry had just had a book that was ghosted for him about the advertising industry. And it's a classic called Have I Ever Lied to You Before? Great title. So I go in on my first day, and I'm going to be running his public relations division of this ad agency. And this is, again, before we could take notes on the keyboard. And I've got my notepad, and I'm ready to go. And he says, David, you know what? I've got this book, and I want you to get me on every radio and TV show and interview across Canada, But I have something more important to tell you. And I spent the next hour listening to him do a monologue on his time with the Travelers. He and Jerry Gray, two Jerrys, families had cottages up at Camp Nivelt, north of Toronto.
Yes.
And Camp Nivelt was a little on the pinkish side. Very, very socialist and beyond. And anyway, they would sing at hootenannies and Saturday night bonfires and everything else. Pete Seeger had come to visit them at one point, and he said to Jerry Gray, who ultimately became a dentist, and I'll tell you the story about that in a sec, but he said to Jerry specifically, I'm here because I love what you and Jerry Goodis are doing, and you've got a couple of other people. I'm going to give you my banjo. I have a bunch of banjos. I want you to have this banjo. Number two, I'm going to give you a song that we can no longer sing in America. Funny how what goes around comes around. The song is This Land Is Your Land, and it's the American version. But during the McCarthy years and the blacklists of artists, performers, filmmakers, film stars, musicians, that song was banned from the airwaves. Wow. So Woody Guthrie wrote it, Pete Seeger recorded it, the Weavers recorded it, a bunch of other groups recorded it, but they couldn't sing it. So he says, I want you to take this tune, and he gave him the charts, and he said, make it your own, make it Canadian. And anyway, that story is in the book about Jerry Gray and connection and everything else. Great. And the mother, Jerry Gray's mother, because he just finished dentistry at U of T, mother said, "Can I machen a leben as a musician? You can't machen a leben. Look, Ma, I'm going to show you." And he did.
That's fantastic.
And he's still alive. Jerry Goodis has passed on. Jerry Gray's still alive.
David, it's very inspiring what you're doing on so many different levels. In terms of you approaching this at your stage of life, which I find very admirable. And I like to say to my viewers and listeners, take something important out of our interviews. And I think that this is one of those things that wherever you're at in life, it doesn't matter. Be growth oriented, continue to grow, find something that you're passionate about. I've met people in their 80s, 85, some of them who live at Baycrest, the seniors home here in Toronto that we all know, who started painting. And some of them are actually very, very good. And I have to tell you something, that your books are fascinating. This is not the first interview I've done with you, and we've spent some time over coffee at our local bagel joint. And I've just always been impressed by what you've accomplished. So, again, I want to wish you, as I say in Yiddish, Yisher Koach, well done. And I would ask my viewers and my listeners to take that out of this interview, because there's so much there. And the second thing, obviously, is there's more, but the second thing is that it is so important to remember those people who contributed to our lives. We should never forget that.
Yeah.
And there are many people who will, let's say we'll go to synagogue and we'll listen to a cantorial presentation of Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur, and we'll walk home and we'll be so inspired. But we'll never go up and shake that man or that woman's hand and say, thank you for changing my life, even so subtly. And you have done that. So I say, well done to you. And you should continue doing this for many years and many volumes, because I think it's absolutely magnificent. I do.
Well, you mentioned other people and things they do. Our next door neighbor, he and I, in the summertime, like little kids, we go out on the street and we play catch.
Yeah.
Car, and then we run over to the curb, whatever. And he says to me one day, he says, David, you got to do a chapter on my friend Howard Shore.
Yeah.
Looked at him, Howard Shore. Light went on, Lord of the Rings trilogies and others.
Yeah.
And he said, Howard Shore, Lorne Michaels and I went to school together. We went to camp together. Lorne Michaels went off to New York with his dream. Howard Shore went to the Berklee School of Music in Boston, and I went into the family business. Anyway, you got to do a piece on Howard Shore. And, that kind of energy, like, wow, what the stimulation is like, I want to know more. I mean, I know a little bit, but I don't know enough.
Yeah.
So again, and one can never do enough research. Back to my comment about Victor Feldbril. I mean, there I am doing all this stuff on Mo Kaufman. There I'm doing all this stuff on his grandson, not knowing that I'd already written about his other grandfather. And I don't have a research department. I don't have a grant to fund this experience. Books are selling on Amazon.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, not a lot of Kindle books. That's a horrible admission for an author to make. It's like one would have thought in this age of technology, but I think the reality is people want to touch and hold a book. And at $20 a book, how can you go wrong? Shameless plug.
And I used to date a woman who actually liked to smell the books. She loved the smell of them.
That's a whole other story.
That is another story, yes.
There you go.
I ask AI to write poems about my guests, so I have an ode to David Eisenstadt for you. There are people who live loudly and people who live thoughtfully, and then there are those who spend a lifetime shaping the voices of others, only to discover later on that they have something powerful to say themselves. David Eisenstadt lived much of his life just behind the stage of Canadian public life, a respected public relations consultant. For over 50 years, he helped companies, leaders, and institutions find clarity in their message, impact without fanfare, influence without ego. And then at 76, he became an author. Under the Radar profiled 30 notable Canadian Jewish musicians. Musicians Under the Radar highlighted 36 more. Then came additional volumes, including a focused edition on 18 Canadian Jewish rock performers, each written not as music criticism, but as cultural history. His mission? To document lives that might otherwise fade into short paragraphs and forgotten footnotes, to spark that quiet response, I didn't know that. David's books feel like acts of retrieval, lifting concealed light back into view, giving artists a second life through research, interviews, and memory. Sold across Amazon, Indigo, and independent bookstores, discussed in synagogues and on radio, his work preserves a chapter of Canadian Jewish cultural contribution that might otherwise remain unseen. After decades helping others tell their stories, he began telling the stories that matter to him. Reinvention at 76, legacy without ego. Light brought forward, David Eisenstadt. Well done.
Who is this? Who is this guy? AI.
He's a good friend of mine. He's becoming a better friend all the time.
Well, I don't know if the camera will show me blushing, but I'm in my heart. Thank you, Avrum, for your kindness and your thoughtfulness, and for connecting with your pal AI.
You're welcome.
Gee, it's almost like it reads like a eulogy.
Yeah. No, sometimes I know.
You know what? I'm not ready. I'm not ready for that. But thank you.
It's not. It's a bar mitzvah speech about you.
Bar mitzvah speech. There you go.
Exactly.
There
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for listening and for watching. Excuse me. It was a fantastic interview, and there's so much here to learn and to pay tribute to David, to pay tribute to so many singer-songwriter musicians across Canada who are Jewish and have contributed so much to our lives. And we have to be cognizant of that, as I said before. We have to be aware of what other people bring to us, and we have to be thankful and pat those people on the back. And one way of doing it is by writing about them, right? And reading about them. So please do that. Until we meet again, as my mother of blessed memory used to say, sei gesund, go in good health. And I appreciate you listening and viewing. David, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Be well.